The patrol cars lined Celebration Avenue just after sunset, their lights washing the quiet Florida neighborhood in red and blue. It was the kind of gated community where families rode bikes at dusk and Christmas decorations stayed up a little too long. No one expected the smell. Deputy Mark Hollis would later say he noticed it before he even stepped out of his cruiser. A heavy, metallic odor drifting through the humid air. The front door of the Todt residence was closed, curtains drawn tight. Mail overflowed from the box. A small welcome mat sat perfectly aligned beneath the door handle. Inside, Anthony Todt was sitting on the couch. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even pretending to search. He just sat there, hands folded, staring at the blank television screen as if waiting for a show to begin. "Sir, we need you to step outside," Hollis called. Anthony blinked slowly, like someone waking from a nap. "Is this about the wellness check?" he asked calmly. The call had come from Connecticut. Relatives hadn't heard from Megan Todt or the children in days. No return texts. No school appearances. No activity on social media. It wasn't like them. Megan was the kind of mother who posted everything: dance recitals, homeschool crafts, Bible study quotes. The deputies entered anyway. The air inside the house was thick and sour. One step past the living room, one turned down the hallway, and everything changed. 4 bodies were discovered in separate bedrooms, Megan and the 3 children. No signs of forced entry. No shattered windows. No overturned furniture. Just silence. Anthony was placed in the back of the cruiser. Through the window, he watched as investigators moved in and out of the home he had shared with his family. He showed no visible panic. No outbursts. Just a detached stillness. But what investigators would soon uncover was far more disturbing than the crime scene itself. Because according to early forensic estimates, the bodies had been there for nearly 3 days. 3 days. And during that time, Anthony Todt had continued living in the house. Neighbors later told reporters they'd seen him take out the trash. One recalled waving at him 2 days prior. Another said he'd noticed the lights on late at night, but assumed nothing of it. After all, families go through things. Arguments. Illness. Stress. No one imagined what was behind those curtains. Detectives brought Anthony into an interview room just after midnight. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He sat straight-backed, hands resting loosely in his lap. "Can you tell us what happened to your family?" Detective Ramirez asked. Anthony exhaled slowly.
"They were sick," he said.
"We all were." Sick with what? Something in the air. Something biblical. The room went quiet. Over the next several hours, Anthony's story shifted like sand. At first, he insisted Megan had attacked the children. Then he claimed they'd all agreed to die together to avoid suffering from a mysterious illness. At one point, he whispered that a higher power had warned him the world was ending. Detectives pressed harder. Financial records painted a darker picture. Anthony, a physical therapist who once ran a successful practice in Connecticut, had recently been under federal investigation for healthcare fraud. Mounting debts. Legal trouble. The potential collapse of the life he'd carefully constructed. Friends described the Todts as devout and close-knit, though some noted Anthony had grown increasingly isolated in recent months. He'd withdrawn from community events, stopped answering calls. Megan, too, had seemed quieter, her once frequent social media updates slowing to almost nothing. Inside the house, investigators discovered something chilling. There were signs that Anthony had attempted to clean parts of the home. Air fresheners plugged into nearly every outlet. Trash bags double-aired. Windows sealed. In the kitchen, a half-eaten meal sat on the counter, dried and untouched. Upstairs, Megan's phone was found hidden in a drawer. Several outgoing messages had been drafted but never sent. One read simply, "We need help." The medical examiner's preliminary findings suggested the victims had been killed over a short window of time. No evidence supported a break-in. No indication anyone else had been inside. Yet Anthony maintained he wasn't responsible. "They were suffering," he murmured during questioning. "I stayed with them so they wouldn't be alone." Detective Ramirez leaned forward. "For 3 days?" Anthony didn't answer. Outside the station, news vans began to gather. Headlines exploded across Florida and beyond. A father, a husband, a quiet neighborhood shattered. But the most unsettling detail hadn't yet reached the public. When crime scene technicians processed the master bedroom, they found something that reframed the entire timeline. A journal tucked beneath the mattress. Its final entry was dated the day before authorities arrived. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably Megan's. It described fear, confusion, and one haunting line. Anthony says it's already done. Investigators stared at the page in silence. Because if Megan had written that entry after the supposed family agreement, then Anthony's version of events was unraveling faster than he could contain it. And as detectives prepared to confront him with the journal, a forensic technician rushed into the hallway holding a sealed evidence bag. "There's something else," she said. "You need to see this." Inside the bag was a syringe, found in the downstairs bathroom trash, and preliminary testing suggested it had been used. When detectives returned to the interrogation room and placed the evidence on the table, Anthony's calm facade cracked. Just for a second. His eyes dropped to the bag. Then he looked up and said 5 words that would echo through the courtroom months later. They weren't supposed to wake up. And in that moment, the case transformed from tragedy to calculated horror. But what investigators still didn't understand was why he stayed. Why live in that house for 3 days? Why sleep under the same roof? Why wait? The answers were buried deeper than anyone expected. And what they would uncover next would prove that the nightmare inside the Todt home didn't begin that week. It began months earlier, long before anyone smelled something wrong. By the time Anthony Todt was formally charged, the quiet streets of Celebration Avenue had transformed into a media corridor. Satellite trucks idled beneath palm trees. Neighbors whispered behind drawn blinds. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. How does a father live beside the bodies of his own family for 3 days? The answer, investigators believed, didn't start in Florida. It started nearly 1,000 miles north, in Connecticut, where Anthony had built a reputation as a respected physical therapist. Patients trusted him. Parents recommended him. He and Megan seemed inseparable, church-going, devoted to their children, living what looked like a carefully curated life. But behind the scenes, financial pressure was mounting. Federal investigators had been examining billing practices at Anthony's clinic for months. Insurance claims didn't add up. Patient records appeared duplicated. Large reimbursements were under review. By late 2019, the walls were closing in. A federal indictment was looming. Anthony never told Megan the full extent of it. Instead, he told her they needed a fresh start. A move to Florida. A rental home in a quiet, master-planned community where no one knew them. A chance to regroup. Friends later said Megan seemed hesitant but loyal. She followed him south with their 3 children, believing the change would stabilize their marriage. For a while, they blended in. Homeschool routines. Family walks. Smiles for neighbors. Then, the isolation deepened. Phone records presented at trial showed Megan's contact with friends dwindled to almost nothing. Text messages from relatives went unanswered. Invitations declined. Anthony handled most communication, often claiming the family was dealing with health issues. In the months leading up to the murders, internet searches conducted from Anthony's devices revealed something more troubling. Searches about toxic substances. Dosage calculations. The effects of certain medications when combined. When confronted with this data during questioning, Anthony shifted again. "You're taking it out of context," he insisted. "I was researching illness. We thought we were infected." But there was no medical diagnosis. No doctor visits confirming a life-threatening condition. No hospital records. Instead, investigators found something else. A life insurance policy. Anthony had recently increased coverage on Megan and the children. The prosecution would later argue that the motive wasn't religious delusion or shared despair, it was control. Financial desperation. A man cornered by legal exposure who believed eliminating his family would solve multiple problems at once. But what complicated the case was Anthony's demeanor. In interrogation footage, he didn't rage. He didn't collapse. He spoke softly, sometimes tearfully, describing Megan as his best friend. He claimed she had agreed they couldn't survive what was coming. She knew, he told detectives. She understood the shame, the prison, the headlines. Detective Ramirez slid the journal entry across the table. Anthony stared at Megan's handwriting. She wrote that under stress, he said quietly. She was scared. Scared of what? Ramirez asked. Anthony didn't respond. Forensic evidence told a harsher story. Toxicology reports indicated the presence of substances consistent with sedation. The syringe found in the bathroom contained trace amounts matching those substances. Medical experts testified that the victims would have been incapacitated before their deaths. It wasn't a chaotic outburst. It was methodical. Perhaps the most disturbing detail emerged from digital timestamps. In the days after the estimated time of death, Anthony logged into banking apps. He checked email. He searched news updates about his own legal case in Connecticut. He even ordered food delivery. The driver later told investigators the house seemed unusually quiet. Anthony accepted the bag at the door, thanked him politely, and closed it quickly behind him. Inside, upstairs, his family lay motionless. Why stay? Psychologists who later evaluated Anthony suggested several possibilities: denial, dissociation, a need to maintain control over the narrative. Some theorized he was waiting for an opportunity to flee, to stage another story, to decide his next move. But the clock ran out when Megan's family requested that welfare check. During pretrial hearings, Anthony's defense team introduced a new angle. They argued he was suffering from severe mental illness at the time of the crime, that he believed his family was terminally ill, that he acted under a distorted perception of reality. The prosecution countered with planning, with internet searches, with financial strain, with the life insurance increase. Then came a revelation that stunned even seasoned investigators. In the final weeks before the murders, Megan had confided in a relative that she was afraid. She said Anthony was acting strange. The relative testified. Paranoid. Saying people were watching them. That the government was coming. Megan had wanted to leave Florida. She had considered returning north with the children. But she never got the chance. As the trial approached, one more piece of evidence surfaced. Security footage from a nearby store dated 2 days after the estimated time of death. Anthony appeared alone, walking through the aisles calmly. He purchased cleaning supplies, air fresheners, heavy-duty trash bags. The timestamp was clear. He returned home shortly after. 3 days. 3 nights under the same roof. When prosecutors presented this footage in court, the courtroom fell silent. Jurors watched Anthony move through the store as if nothing had happened. No visible panic. No rush. Just quiet calculation. On the stand, Anthony finally offered his most detailed version of events. He claimed Megan had initiated a discussion about ending their lives to spare the children from suffering through his impending arrest and public disgrace. He said he resisted at first. Then he agreed. "We prayed," he told the jury. "We held hands." But prosecutors dismantled that narrative piece by piece. There were no suicide notes from Megan. No evidence the children understood or consented. The journal entry suggested fear, not agreement. And then came the final blow to Anthony's credibility. Forensic analysis determined that one of the children had defensive injuries, subtle but present, a sign that someone had tried to resist. The courtroom air seemed to thin as that detail was explained. If this had been a shared decision, why would a child fight? Anthony's expression remained composed as the testimony concluded. But observers noted his jaw tighten for the first time. The image of a devoted father was eroding, replaced by something colder. Yet one question lingered even as the prosecution prepared to rest its case. If Anthony had planned this to escape shame and prison, why didn't he run? His passport was still in the drawer. His car sat in the driveway. He made no attempt to leave the state. It was as if he had resigned himself to being found. Or as if part of him wanted to be. As closing arguments loomed, a final forensic review uncovered something investigators had initially overlooked, an anomaly in the timeline that suggested the order of events might not have been what anyone assumed. And if that new interpretation was correct, then the final hours inside that house were even more disturbing than the prosecution had argued, because it meant someone may have been alive longer than previously believed.